Good evening. Welcome to English section of Araka Media. Joining with us in this section today is Dr. Jeannine Fletcher, a professor of theology at Fordham University of New York City. Welcome and thank you very much, Dr. Jeannine, for joining with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Jeannine is also an author of these books, Monopoly on Salvation, Motherhood as Metaphor, which was about the interreligious dialogue, and The Sin of White Supremacy. First of all, please introduce yourself with some information about your institution and your classes.
So I hope that you can hear me okay. With the storm here in New York City and always the challenge of being online, I'm hoping that I'm coming through clearly and that I can let you know a little bit about myself in that I am a professor of theology at Fordham University in New York City. And my area of specialization is on interreligious dialogue. And so I try to develop classes and teach students not just about one religious tradition, but about different religious traditions. And so my courses introduce students to the idea of religion and introduce students to theology, and then try to introduce what's called comparative theology. How do different religious traditions see the world in different ways?
Thanks. Would you agree that students in the United States are interested in learning about Buddhism?
Sure. I would say that they definitely are, and from a variety of places. So American students are very interested in the different ways of seeing the world. So there are a lot of people who talk about American students in the religious realm as being seekers. They're looking for a particular way of seeing the world. They're open to really kind of exploring what different people think about the world and trying to make sense of that for themselves. So students who are seekers are very interested in Buddhist patterns of thought to help them kind of test out, well, does Buddhism give me a new way to think about the world? There's another group of students in the US that are either heritage Buddhists, that is, that their parents might have come from a Buddhist country, or that they themselves are international students. And many of those international students are attracted to the Buddhist classes because they're wanting to explore their own heritage. So it's really kind of two different types of students. Some are interested in Buddhism because they're curious. They want to know more about somebody else's way of seeing the world. And another group of students is really wanting to deepen their own understanding of their cultural tradition, their family tradition, and the roots of where they come from.
Good. Sounds like they are really interested in or are engaged in learning Buddhism for some reasons, for some students. Okay, then let's recall your memory. Throughout your career in theology, what would you say was the most impactful experience from Buddhism and other studies?
So I think about this question from the perspective of how have students encountered Buddhism in those two ways that I just described. And two really memorable experiences stick out for me. One was about 15 years ago. So that's how memorable it is. It stuck with me for that long. And students were being introduced to Buddhist principles that ask us to think about how we grasp at the self, right? And Buddhist principles that ask us to let go of ego and to let go of our notions of the self. And I asked them to think about what are the patterns in their own lives where they experience the Buddhist teaching about needing to let go of that image of the self that I'm holding on to, that I'm grasping. And they were kind of working their way through that. And one of the students, this is back in the early era of Facebook, and one of the students said, yeah, I experienced this desire, this need for everybody else to like me or to be my friend. And the Buddhist teaching seemed to be telling this student to let go of that and to not be grasping, not desiring, not holding on to that kind of preformed sense of self. And so I think students who are in this particular era of social media and getting a lot of positive feedback about who they are by how many likes they have, I think they read some of the Buddhist invitation to let go of the self, let go of the notion of the self, as a real alternative, right? They can see the way that they desire those likes and likes and likes, right? And that's a form of craving. It's a form of holding on to the self. I can add another one onto this because just recently, students were really thinking about the Buddha's own experience of not seeing the world clearly, right? So we tell the classic story of the Buddha as the prince, right? And how the real world is kept from him. And we talked about, I asked the question, well, what are the things in your own world that keep you from seeing things clearly? And they immediately turned to Instagram, right? And the way in which that picture of what everybody else says is reality. They said, well, they know that that's not reality, right? That's the best version of somebody else's life. But it nevertheless, it increases their desire to be something other than in the moment. And so some of those Buddhist principles really still resonate with Western students and maybe students around the globe who are hearing all kinds of messaging from their social media about who they're supposed to be. And so the Buddha's story becomes sort of an existential story about really rooting oneself deeply in what's true and what's real and seeing the world in a different way. I had a second really powerful experience, again, this time with a student, and very recently with a student whose parents were from Vietnam. And so she is Buddhist, by heritage, and she practices Buddhism within her family. But here in the United States, she felt like she kind of needed to put that aside, right? She kind of needed to fit in with a more Christian world. And it was through the study of Buddhism, or thinking about the experiences of Buddhists in America, that she really wanted to say, hey, this is a part of who I am, and it's a part of what America is. So those two elements, again, the experience of Buddhism for students from very different locations.
In his book, The Land of the Great Image, a Catholic and Portuguese tourist, Manrique, who visited Arakan in 17th century and even lived many years at the king's court of Arakan, described Buddhism as a tolerant religion. What do you yourself consider of Buddhism, Dr. Jeannine?
That's a great question. And I think of it in a few different ways. One, that the teaching of the Buddha does invite an openness and a tolerance. One of my very favorite elements of the beginning of the Buddhist teaching is that the Buddha didn't say, oh, you have to believe this. The Buddha said, this is what is true about the world and the reality that we live in. Come and see for yourself. So there's a tolerance there that says, come and experience this, come and see for yourself. There's another element of what I could see as the 17th century Catholic response to Buddhism, really hearing the heart of the Buddhist message as a message of tolerance. Because in a worldview that insists that we're interconnected, that asks us to think not just about the self, but about the self in relation to the great chain of being, well, that invites a real tolerance, because I am connected to the other. I am connected to the broader network of created reality. It's not just my interests, but the interests of all sentient beings. So there are elements of the Buddhist tradition that really, if one pauses and listens, right, the teaching of the Buddha of opening one's heart and having the same heart for all of the world's creatures, all sentient beings that a mother has for her only child, well, that opens up a real invitation, really, to those who are different to think about being in relationship to them. But to claim that a religion is a tolerant religion, and then to jump from that to say, well, that means that Buddhists are the most tolerant people in the world, that is a little bit more tricky, because the teaching of the Buddha is one thing, and then human beings trying to live that out is a very different thing. So I think that we have examples of Buddhist intolerance, even in our present world, that we really have to wrestle with the teaching of the Buddha and the way that it plays out, or the way that it is continued in those who follow the teachings. So I can see there being really wonderful teachings at the heart of Buddhism, wonderfully tolerant teachings that ask us to really see ourselves deeply related to other human beings, deeply related to the world that we're part of. That invites tolerance, but I think that human beings so often fall short of that vision of our religious traditions.
What do you think are the most valuable teachings Buddhism has for Americans?
Have you ever read the work or any of the work by Sulak Sivaraksa? he is offering to Western audiences what he describes and others describe as an engaged Buddhism. He says it's not just about meditating. It's not just about being with the Buddha. It's not just about kind of family relationships. It's also about how it might change the way that we live in the world. And so his engaged Buddhism, he starts with something like those ideas that I raised up in terms of tolerance, to say that the Buddhist ideas of interdependence, the three poisons, and now you'll have to help me with the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, right? That he says that the Buddha taught that that's the foundation of the violence that we see in the world. And that if we can dig deep into those practices that are rooted in greed and hatred and delusion, and if we can change those, we could change the way that we live in the world. And what Sivaraksa proposes is that the central teachings of the Buddha, the teachings about right view and right practice and seeing the world in the right way and acting in the world in the right way, the teachings of the Buddha about greed and delusion and grasping, Sivaraksa suggests that those could be very effective in responding to modern capitalistic trends that are destroying humanity and are destroying the earth. And he really says that the whole project of modern capitalism and the whole project of consumption is something that the center of the Buddhist teaching would say, why are we grasping at everything? Why are we building up all of these bank accounts and things in our houses, right? That's destroying our true selves, and it's destroying our planet. So I'm really compelled by Sulak Sivaraksa's proposal that Westerners and Americans might have a lot to learn from practices of simplicity, practices of humility, practices of reorienting what it is we desire. Because what Sivaraksa draws out of the Buddhist teaching is that we have that desire, and here's the thing that we want now, and we go out and we grab it and we purchase it and we destroy the earth in order to have it. And he says, well, you're not even living in this present moment, right? And so he does a really effective job of saying this Buddhist practice of seeing the world clearly, this Buddhist practice of calming the mind, this Buddhist practice of then living in the world in the precepts of the Eightfold Path. He does a wonderful job saying, look, these are ancient truths, but they might actually transform the world and save the planet if we might find ways of following them. I wonder if that would be convincing to you.
Very interesting. And from many points, I do agree with you guys. And any message for our audience and theological or philosophical students?
Yeah. I think that I'll be happy to put this again in relationship to the Buddha and what I learned as the Buddha's invitation to come and see for yourself. Not only was that an ancient truth, but that's also a truth that we need to hear today. I don't know about all the members of the audience listening tonight, but so many of us here in the United States get caught up in what they hear from other sources. They get caught up in a certain narrative, a certain story about what's going on in the world or about what other people are doing. And they don't always take the time to focus and to center and to clear their minds and to come and to see for themselves. Right? And so I think that is a philosophical message that is grounded in the Buddhist practice. It's grounded in the Buddha's teaching, but it also is universally applicable to invite us to really think about, think through, see things with clarity, and then act compassionately in the world. So if I came back around to the question about what students in America find interesting in Buddhism, I would apply that to all philosophical and theological learners. What does it look like for us to be open to see things from a new perspective? What does it look like for us to learn a worldview that's very different from our own, and to then come back to our own worldview and be able to say, okay, maybe I don't have all the answers, and maybe there is room still to explore and to grow and to see for ourselves what is true about the world that we live in.
Dr. Jeannine, thank you very much for your time and sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. See you next time.